Okay, this is a different kind of reaction video that I normally do. This is about it with American football. Uh, this is from Irish Breakdown, Notre Dame versus Ohio State, stacking them up position by position. Now, this game was played last night, so we pretty much know what happened. We already know what happened. Ohio State won 21-10, but this is his version of what he thought was going to happen prior to this game. And let's just take a listen to it. I'm going to match it up with some of the stats from last night.
Well,
his name is Brian Driscoll. Please click like, share, and subscribe for him if you care about Notre Dame football. And like, share, and subscribe for me as well.
There are two ways to look at this. One is to just kind of stack up the rosters next to each other and say who's better here, who's better there. And
now, the general consensus going into this game, despite what he's going to tell you, was that Ohio State was going to win the game regardless. Okay, and I've heard some people say it was going to be a blowout. Yesterday, Desmond Howard said it was going to be a closer, and he was right. It was a close game. Now, I thought Ohio State was going to, Ohio State's offense was just going to blow them out of the water. It didn't happen. But the other question going into the game was how good was Ohio State's defense? And Ohio State's defense for the past couple of years has not been very good. And so that's what the general consensus is on this, and that's where he's going on.
And that's a fun endeavor. And then the other way is to kind of look at matchups, O-line versus D-line. So we'll do it quickly, just kind of go through both ways. When you look at quarterback, I think that's obviously an advantage Ohio State.
Yeah, Ohio State's going to have the better at the skill position. The skill position, Ohio quarterback, running back, and wide receiver, and he acknowledges this as well. But I think he underestimated Ohio State's offensive line a little bit in this game. Notre Dame has an amazing offensive line, no question. Notre Dame has an amazing offensive line, but I think Ohio State's. I think he underestimated it a little bit.
I think they have not only the better starter, the proven starter, they have very good depth. I like the young quarterback that they have who played a little bit last year. I think Devin Brown's a little overrated, but he's a decent player.
I've never liked that term overrated. What the hell is overrated? Okay, you're good or you're not. Okay, he's overrated, or they think he's better than he actually is. That's one of the words I don't care for. He's overrated.
And he's your third or fourth quarterback. Running back, I like Notre Dame's depth better than Ohio State's, but TreVeyon Henderson is significantly better than anybody else has. So if you're looking starter, it's Ohio State. If you're looking depth, it's Notre Dame. But that starter part is really, really important.
And really, the depth last night showed for Ohio State more than it did for Notre Dame, is based on what I saw. But we'll look at the statistics after this.
Important.
After we watch this video.
Wide receiver, right now, I'd give the edge to Ohio State. Obviously.
Yeah, Ohio State has the better receivers. I mean, I don't think Notre Dame had a player, had a very good, had a wide receiver, at least coming into the game, that was considered one of the top wide receivers in the country. But they played well. I thought Notre Dame did an excellent job. The first play from scrimmage was a nice catch and a big play, and they made some good catches. There was a great catch in the second quarter, which I don't know the player's name, but was absolutely fantastic. But yeah, Ohio State had the better of the wide receivers, no question about that.
See, Jackson Smith and Jigba's better than anybody Notre Dame has. They have very good depth. I think Notre Dame's depth is gonna be better than people think, but it would be.
Yeah, they were good. To be fair, they were good, and also Notre Dame's quarterback played reasonably well.
Unwise and very homerish. If I was going to start trying to say, oh no, they're as good as Ohio State. I think Ohio State has the best receiving core in the country coming back. So that's where you start to see Ohio State have some big advantages. Notre Dame, huge advantage at tight end.
Yeah, agreed. Ohio State doesn't use its tight end very often, but Notre Dame's tight end had a very good game last night. Had a great catch in the third quarter, I believe it was. And then he looked like he was going to get a little bit more than he actually got, but he fumbled the ball without anybody hitting it, but he fell on it.
I think Notre Dame has the advantage of offensive line as well. I think they have. Again,
I think he underestimated Ohio State's offensive line a little bit. Ohio State's offensive line played a lot better than I don't recall. I think C.J. Stroud got sacked once, maybe twice in the whole game, but I thought Ohio State's offensive line did reasonably well, and I would have called it a push after last night. Notre Dame's offensive line is outstanding, but I would have called this a push.
More talent top to bottom than Ohio State does on the offensive line. So offensively, Ohio State has the advantage of quarterback with C.J. Stroud. They also have very good depth.
And also keep in mind this is a Notre Dame fan's perspective.
They have the advantage when it comes to the top of the running back depth chart. I like Notre Dame's depth better, but advantage Ohio State there. They have an advantage at receiver, a significant one if you're going to include the top level player plus the projected talent of the others. But I think that the depth is where Notre Dame can close the gap. If guys like Lorenzo Styles and Braden Lindsey and Deion Colesy and Tobias Merriweather can be the players I think they can be, the gap won't be as large in practice as it is right now on paper. Tight end, big advantage Notre Dame. O-line, advantage Notre Dame. Not by.
Like I said, for me, and I think the way it played out, you can disagree with me if you want. Quarterback, Ohio State. Wide receiver, Ohio State. Running backs, Ohio State. I thought tight end, definitely Notre Dame. And I would say offensive line last night, push. Okay, Notre Dame's offensive line was very good in my opinion. They did a reasonably good job. They didn't they didn't score a lot of points. They ended up with 10 points, but I thought they were their game plan for really most of the for 3 quarters was very very good and kept Ohio State at bay for the most part.
A ton, but advantage Notre Dame. Defensively, this is where it's kind of the opposite story for me. Defensive line, I think.
And again, this didn't play out like he thinks it, like he seemed to think it was going to play out.
Notre Dame has a better defensive line. Now, I know Ohio State has a bunch of 5-star players, but Isaiah Foskey has had more sacks last year than the top 4 returning starter.
Ohio State has a new defensive coordinator. I'm terrible with names, so I probably should have done research and given so I could sound smarter than I actually am. But no, Ohio State's defensive line was very good last night.
4 returning defensive linemen for Ohio State, defensive ends for Ohio State. And if you take recruiting rankings, and this is like a silly tweet that I saw the other day where they were comparing the Ohio State receivers to the Notre Dame DBs, and they just use recruiting rankings. Like Julian Fleming's a 5-star. Julian Fleming's done nothing at Ohio State. They had Cam Hart like he's the number 600-something player in the country. Does anyone still think that's who Cam Hart is? That's a silly comparison, and that's for people who really don't know football and don't have a way to.
And I'm not one to say, you don't know football. Come on, please. I mean, look, we all have eyes. We all saw what happened last year with Ohio State. It was like running through water. Ask Oregon, ask Michigan, ask Utah. It was not difficult to run through Ohio State. It was not difficult to score points against Ohio State last year. Okay, so, yeah, I mean, look. Yeah, they're 5 stars. They're good players. Okay, but they haven't been developed properly. That's the only thing you could possibly say in their defense. But, yeah.
Make an argument based on evaluation. They just pull silly, arbitrary things like recruiting rankings and act like that just means what a guy's going to be.
And I've never been a fan of recruiting rankings of this team has the best recruits, this team has the best recruits. Because the thing is, you don't know what's going to – the thing I always bring up is Justin Zwick, Troy Smith. Justin Zwick, I think, was a 5-star recruit. Troy Smith was a 3-star recruit. Troy Smith won the Heisman Trophy. Justin Zwick was backing him up. High school ranking don't necessarily translate to the college game. And just like great college players don't necessarily translate to the NFL.
But if you look at talent, if you look at production, if you look at what they've actually done on the field, Notre Dame has a significant advantage over Ohio State on the defensive line. Maybe that changes, kind of like what we talked about receiver with Notre Dame. The defensive line could be the flip of that now that they have a better defensive coordinator. Linebacker, advantage Notre Dame, significant.
Again, he's talking about significant. He's basing this on last year, on the past couple of years, and you can't really fault him for that. But going into this game, if you were to reevaluate what he's saying right now, the defensive line for Ohio State versus defensive line for Notre Dame, you would probably maybe give a slight advantage to Ohio State. Same thing at least what I saw last night on linebackers. I think it wasn't there wasn't a whole lot to separate the teams. Okay. I think Ohio State had more sacks than Notre Dame did. Again, Notre Dame got 10 points off an opening play that went for 40 or 50 yards and ended up in a field goal. and then scored a touchdown in the second quarter on a pretty good drive that they had. That's all they did for the rest of the game. Okay, that's the only points they ever got. Okay, and if you're basing this on last year, Ohio State probably would have given up 20. In fact, my buddy thought Notre Dame was going to get 35 points last night. Okay, I thought Notre Dame would get at least 20 points, but
an advantage for Notre Dame, even with some of the issues Notre Dame had last year. I'll take J.D. Bertrand over anybody that Ohio State's trotting out there. I'll take Jack Kaiser over most of the guys that Ohio State has had. And I'll definitely take a healthy Maris Liufau over anybody that Ohio State has. And then, of course, Notre Dame has a great freshman linebacker class, as does Ohio State. So those kind of negate each other. But when you look at the veterans, it's not even close. Notre Dame has a significantly better linebacker situation than Ohio State. Safety, it's close. I think Ohio State has more proven players. They have more guys that I'm like, okay, that guy has done this, that guy has done that. Whereas some of Notre Dame's proven players haven't played that well. DJ Brown, Houston Griffith. I like the young up-and-coming talent that Notre Dame has with Rowan Henderson and Xavier Watt. So there's a little bit of uncertainty and projection for Notre Dame or Ohio State. It's like, well, I know who they are. I don't know how much better they're going to be, but I know who they are. I call that a bit of a wash. The reason is Ohio State has more guys that I know who they are. Notre Dame doesn't. I think the reason I say wash, maybe slight advantage Notre Dame, is the fact that I think the upside of Notre Dame's players is higher, plus the presence of Brandon Joseph, who was a consensus All-American 2 years ago, played against Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game, had an interception in the end zone of Justin Fields in that game as well. So I'd say wash, maybe a slight advantage to Notre Dame, but again, I think
again, this is also from a Notre Dame perspective, and no, going into this game, I didn't see it as being a significant advantage Notre Dame on the defense like he does, and that's perfectly fine. I have no problem with his reaction to it or how what he thinks about it, especially with the way Ohio State played the previous couple of seasons.
At some point, the proven nature of what the safeties of Ohio State have done, and they're not proven to be great, they're just solid, gives them an advantage. And then a cornerback, that's the interesting one. So I know most people are going to go Ohio State. I'm not impressed with Ohio State's corners. I know Denzel Burke's a good player. He's got a lot to prove to me. Cam Smith gets a lot of love. Not sure why. Cam Hart's the best corner of either of those groups. I'm going wash because I think, again, Ohio State has more guys that have kind of proven to be solid players.
Look, Notre Dame's defensive strategy was not too dissimilar from Bill Belichick's in Super Bowl 36, the Patriots against the Rams. What they had hoped to do was make C.J. Stroud frustrated and try and force the game. But that didn't happen. And one of the concerns about Ohio State has been that sometimes Ohio State will beat themselves and not go and use their run game, okay? And a lot of that is where this is coming from because the defensive strategy of Notre Dame's was very effective last night.
I think Notre Dame has better depth. So secondary-wise, it's a bit of a wash to me. I think Notre Dame, however, in my opinion, has the two best players in Cam Hart and Brandon Joseph. I think Ohio State has more guys that have proven that they can be at least solid players, but they struggled last year. That's an area where you expect Jim Knowles' presence to make them better, and so that should help. But I think Notre Dame still has the two best players. So quarterback, advantage Ohio State. Running back, advantage Ohio State. Receiver, advantage Ohio State. Tight end, advantage Notre Dame. Offensive line, advantage Notre Dame. Defensive line, advantage Notre Dame. Linebacker, advantage Notre Dame. And then secondary, wash.
Now, as it played out last night, as I saw, and I'm different from him. I'm not him. Quarterback, I thought Ohio State. Running backs, Ohio State. Wide receivers, Ohio State. Tight end was definitely Notre Dame. I thought the offensive lines were push. I thought the defensive line slightly favored Ohio State, more, but you can make an argument for a push. Linebackers, I thought it was a push. And secondary, I thought Ohio State's was better. But Notre Dame did make some plays, and they're going to make some plays. So I don't think it played out exactly how he thought it was going to play out. It didn't play out certainly how I thought it was going to play out.
So for me, that's 4 for Notre Dame, 3 for Ohio State, and then 2 that are a wash, safety, corner. If you put them all as a secondary, the thing that where I would give Ohio State an advantage to kind of maybe tie this thing up a little bit is I have a lot of concerns about Notre Dame's operation when it comes.
Now he's going to talk about the kicking game, and Notre Dame punter had a hell of a punt. Now Ohio State ended up taking it and scoring a touchdown, I believe, with it. How it was that one? Yeah, I think it was. They had a good punt, and Ohio State good. The kicking game was fine. Ohio State missed a field goal, which they should have made. So
comes to the kicking operation, I'm very concerned about Notre Dame's punting and in place kicking situation, and Ohio State, to me, they have some questions as well. I'm actually looking up to see if their kicker came back. I know he was listed as a senior last year, but as we all know, those things, because of COVID, those things are a little bit jacked up. Yeah, so Noah Ruggles is still on their roster, so that, to me, gives Ohio State an advantage there. He was a steady player last year, 20 of 21 on field goals, 74 of 74 on extra points. Doesn't have a strong leg, but he's got a consistent leg, a steady leg, which I think is something that Notre Dame doesn't have.
Ohio State, for the most part, is not going to have to rely on their kickers to win games this year. But
right now, obviously. So I would give them the advantage, and then, of course, their punter's back. So I would give Ohio State an advantage when it comes to the kicking operation. The return game, both have some talent. Both are inconsistent. Coverage-wise, I'd probably give a slight edge to Notre Dame based on what I saw last year. But they're going to both be athletic and long and have talented players running down there. So a lot of it depends on just the coaching aspect. But that's one where I'd give an advantage to Ohio State. So I think Notre Dame stacks up a lot better than people think. And I think a big part of the reason why a lot of people don't think Notre Dame stacks up is simply because of recruiting. I think people look at 5-star here, not 5-star there, so they must be better, when in reality, Notre Dame's non-5-star, non-top 100 recruits have been significantly better college football players than the 5-star kids from Ohio State.
Well, he's not wrong. Okay, a lot of what he said he's not wrong by, and he's basing it on last year. And if you watch the game as it played out this year, he was pretty much spot on a lot of this stuff, but not completely correct. Like I said, I think things played out a little bit differently than probably what he thought was. But look, it was exactly what you would have expected from a 2 versus 5 game. Most people thought Notre Dame's the Paul Feinbaums of the world thought that Notre Dame should not have been the 5th-ranked team in the nation. Well, I think they showed themselves pretty well. It depends on what Ohio State does from here on out. If Ohio State is blowing people out of the water, then this is only going to make Notre Dame look good, because coming into the shoe and only losing 21-10. Now, so but I think I thought he was fair with his analysis. Now, if I move and I look at the stats, this is how the game played out. It was 21-10, and if you look at Notre Dame's stats, Buckner, the passing quarterback of Notre Dame, Tyler Buckner, 10 of 18, 177 yards. Not bad. Running back, Chris Tyree had 28 yards, and that he was the leading rusher. Receiving was Lorenzo Styles Jr., 54 yards. Defense, they got one sack. Okay. And as far as the leading tackler was Clarence Lewis. But still a decent game played by Notre Dame. If you go to Ohio State, C.J. Stroud was 24 of 34 for 223 yards, 2 touchdowns. Travion Henderson had 91 yards, and Mayan Williams had 84 yards. Agubuka had 90 yards catching in a touchdown. Marvin Harrison Jr. had 56. Xavier Johnson had 34 yards. Smith and Jigba got hit in the head, had 2 catches for 3 yards, so he wasn't really a factor in the game. Now, defensively, this is where Ohio State was a little bit better than I think he had. Ohio State had 3 sacks on the game, and I think that Michael Hall Jr. really made a name for himself, did a fantastic job. But still, it played out pretty well. If you look at the total yards, Ohio State had almost 400 yards, 395 yards in the game, to 253 for Notre Dame. Rushing, Ohio State has significant, 172 to 76. Um, Total plays, Ohio State had 69 to 48 for Notre Dame. Look, Notre Dame did a reasonably good job in this game, and they should be proud of themselves. A lot of people had this game possibly being a blowout. It wasn't. And like I said, his analysis isn't necessarily wrong. Okay, it's probably what, if I was a Notre Dame fan, what I would probably have said. But I think it played out a little bit differently. Like I said, he said the advantage Ohio State quarterback, wide receiver, running back, that showed up. Tight end, Notre Dame advantage. Yep, agreed. Offensive line, he said Notre Dame. I thought it was more of a push. Defensive line looked like it was slightly more Ohio State than Notre Dame. He said, I want Notre Dame. He said the linebackers, Notre Dame. I thought that was more Ohio State. I thought the secondary for Ohio State was better. He had that more like a push. And the kicking game, I think, was a push as well. But, I thought both teams played reasonably well, like I said before. Good game, fun game to watch. I enjoyed it. I'm happy Ohio State won, but Notre Dame has a lot to be proud of, and I wish the Irish nothing but the best in the future. My cousin, Richard, he graduated from Notre Dame, so, well, happy to beat you, but it is what it is. But thanks for watching. Have a good rest of your day. Please click like, share, and subscribe for me, and please click like, share, and subscribe for him.